Ethan Blackwell, the seeker of truth, sat at his desk, a dark room lit only by the glow of his desk lamp. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. His eyes scanned the pages of a journal, its brittle edges betraying its age. With each word he read, a deeper mystery unfolded before him, one he could not ignore. The entries spoke of disappearances, strange shadows in the night, and a force that seemed to lurk just beyond perception. Ethan, a man of logic and reason, felt a strange chill run down his spine. He'd heard whispers of this before, but never in such detail. His fingers paused over a particular line. The shadow people are not what they seem. His heart raced. This was no ordinary case. This was something darker. His mind whirred as he wondered if the answers lay hidden within these pages. But how far was he willing to go to uncover the truth? He closed his eyes, steeling himself for the road ahead. This was only the beginning. Ethan Blackwell sat back in his chair, the weight of the journal pressing down on him. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him. He glanced nervously over his shoulder, the shadows in the room now feeling almost alive. The cryptic message about the shadow people lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. He turned to Lara Graves, the voice of reason, an old colleague who had warned him against such investigations. Lara, a cautious and practical individual, had always been the first to pull Ethan back from the edge. But this time, Ethan felt that the truth was closer than ever before. He had to continue despite the risk. "I know you think I'm chasing ghosts," he said, his voice steady but filled with doubt. "But this feels different." Ethan Blackwell's mind raced as he sifted through the photographs, each one showing faces of those who had vanished, their eyes staring back at him as if pleading for answers. Among the blurred images, a familiar face caught his attention. It was a woman, her expression frozen in fear, her face too familiar for comfort. He ran his fingers over the photo, a sinking feeling in his chest. Claire. The name echoed in his mind. Claire was someone he had once known, someone he had loved, but she had disappeared years ago, leaving no trace behind. The coincidence seemed impossible. He had never connected her disappearance to the shadow people before, but now, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. Could it be that Claire had been taken by them? The thought consumed him. The room felt smaller, the air thicker as he picked up the phone, dialing a number he hadn't dialed in years. He hesitated for a moment, knowing the consequences of digging into this past. But he had no choice now. He had to know what happened to Claire. Ethan Blackwell leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk as he stared at the phone. It rang once, twice, and then a voice answered. "Ethan? Is that you?" Lara's voice broke through the static. "I thought you'd gone quiet on me." He swallowed hard, the weight of the conversation about to unfold pressing down on him. "Lara," Ethan began, his voice strained. "I need your help." He didn't wait for her to respond before continuing. "Claire, she's connected to this. The shadow people, everything that's happening, it's all tied to her disappearance." Lara was silent for a long moment before speaking again. "Ethan, you've always been driven by your obsession with the truth, but this is different. You're walking into something dangerous." Ethan's voice grew firm, unwavering. "I don't care. I have to know what happened to her." There was another silence. Then Lara sighed. "Fine, but you're not doing this alone." Ethan's heart raced at the thought of Lara helping him again. They had been close once, but their bond had faded over time. Still, something in her voice told him she was still invested in the truth, no matter how dark it might get. Ethan Blackwell sat back in his chair, the phone call now over. Lara's promise to help had brought a small measure of relief, but it wasn't enough. He knew the danger he was stepping into, but the possibility of finally uncovering the truth about Claire's disappearance had ignited something deep inside him. He could feel the weight of the journey ahead pressing against his chest. As he stared at the photos on his desk, Ethan's mind raced. He needed to go deeper to uncover whatever dark force was behind these disappearances. He was no longer just chasing shadows. He was chasing answers, and nothing would stop him now. The faint glow of the lamp flickered, casting a brief shadow that seemed to move on its own. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone in this room anymore. He had felt it earlier, but now, the presence was undeniable. A shadow, a dark figure, lurking just beyond his vision. He turned quickly, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence of the room, closing in around him. He exhaled slowly, trying to calm his racing thoughts. No turning back, he muttered to himself, and with that, the next phase of his investigation began. Ethan Blackwell's heart raced as he walked down the desolate alley. The streetlights flickered above him, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. His breath came in short, shallow bursts, anxiety gnawing at him. Tonight, he was closer than ever to the truth. He could feel it. The clues were all pointing here, this abandoned building at the end of the street. It had once been a place of industry, but now it stood hollow, dark, and forgotten. The whispers he'd heard about the shadow people had grown louder in his mind, especially after Claire's disappearance. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden rustling in the distance, followed by the faintest whisper of a voice. He froze, every nerve on edge. What was that? He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as a chill ran down his spine. He wasn't alone. Something, or someone, was watching him from the shadows. He stepped forward cautiously, determination in his eyes, though his mind screamed for him to turn back. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the silence as he reached the rusted door of the building. The heavy metal door creaked ominously as he pushed it open. Inside, the darkness swallowed him whole, and the air was thick with dust and decay. His flashlight beam cut through the blackness, revealing old machinery and broken windows. His breath caught in his throat when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind him. He turned swiftly, but there was nothing. The tension in the air was suffocating, and yet there was a strange pull, urging him forward. Something in this building held the answers he sought. His flashlight swept across the room, landing on a set of stairs that led down into the deeper parts of the building. Without hesitation, Ethan descended into the darkness below, each step creaking beneath his weight. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but the thirst for answers pushed him onward. As Ethan descended the stairs, the darkness seemed to close in around him. His flashlight flickered for a moment, and in that brief instant, he thought he saw something move at the edge of his vision. A shadow, not quite human, slipping in and out of the darkness. His pulse quickened, but he pressed on, determined to uncover what lay beneath the building. The sound of his footsteps was now joined by an unsettling scratching noise that echoed off the stone walls. He shone the flashlight in the direction of the sound, but there was nothing, just empty, rotting walls. The scratching stopped, but a low, guttural whisper followed, words too faint to understand. Panic surged in Ethan's chest as the shadows seemed to shift. He gripped the flashlight tighter, trying to steady his breathing. It was then that he heard it, a voice clear as day, but chilling in its tone. "Leave now, or never leave at all." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the voice echoed in the darkness. He looked around frantically, trying to find the source. But there was nothing but the whispers growing louder, more insistent. He stumbled backward, his foot hitting something solid. A metal door stood before him, slightly ajar. His mind screamed at him to turn around and run, but he couldn't. The pull of the mystery, of the shadow people, was stronger than fear. Ethan pushed the door open with shaking hands. The room inside was cold, much colder than the rest of the building. As he stepped into the room, he felt the air shift. He was no longer alone. The shadows seemed to move, stretching toward him as if reaching for his very soul. The voice whispered once more, this time close, too close. "You should have stayed away." Ethan stepped into the room, the darkness swallowing him whole. The temperature dropped significantly, and he could see his breath in the air. He had crossed a threshold. There was no going back now. His heart raced as he scanned the room, the shadows growing thicker, more oppressive. Then, out of the corner of his eye he saw it, movement. A figure, tall and shrouded in darkness, standing motionless in the far corner. Ethan's breath hitched, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his feet remained rooted to the spot. Slowly the figure stepped forward, its presence more terrifying than anything Ethan had encountered before. The shadows seemed to wrap around the figure like a cloak, but as it moved closer, Ethan could see its eyes, glowing faintly, like the embers of a dying fire. A whisper escaped its lips, barely audible, but enough to send a chill down Ethan's spine. "You shouldn't have come." Ethan Blackwell stood at the edge of the abandoned warehouse, staring at the cold, rusted door. His mind raced, but his body was frozen. The weight of the decision was heavy on his shoulders. Inside, the truth he had sought was waiting, but so was the danger. As he stood in the doorway, he heard a familiar voice from behind him. It was Lara. "You're making a mistake, Ethan," she said, her tone firm yet filled with worry. He turned slowly to face her. She stood a few steps away, her arms crossed, her gaze serious. "I can't let you do this alone. You don't understand the consequences of what you're about to uncover." Ethan's eyes narrowed, a flash of frustration crossing his face. "I'm not doing this for myself, Lara. It's for Claire, for all of them," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Lara hesitated, her face softening for a brief moment. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You can't trust everyone, Ethan. There are things, people, working against you." He paused, the words hanging in the air, his heart racing. But before he could respond, a figure appeared in the distance, silhouetted by the faint light of the moon. The betrayal had begun. Lara's words echoed in Ethan's mind as he walked deeper into the warehouse. "There are things, people, working against you." He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of his footsteps on the cracked concrete floor. He moved cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As he turned a corner, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, standing in the center of the room, was the man he least expected to see. David. His old friend. No, his betrayer. David's face was obscured by the shadows, but Ethan could see the familiar smirk in his eyes. "I knew you'd come, Ethan," David said coldly, his voice dripping with disdain. Ethan's stomach turned. "Why, David? Why all this?" he asked, struggling to understand. David's smirk widened. "Because you're a means to an end, Ethan. You've always been so damn good at finding the truth. But not this time. Not this truth." Ethan stepped forward, trying to make sense of the situation, but every instinct told him to run. David had always been the charming one, the manipulator, but this was a different level of deception. "You've been working with them all along, haven't you?" Ethan demanded, his voice tight with anger. David chuckled softly, his eyes never leaving Ethan. "Not just working with them, Ethan. I've been leading them." Ethan's heart sank. The shadow people. It had all led to this moment, this betrayal. "You sold out, David," Ethan said bitterly. "For what? Power? Money?" David's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "For survival, and you were always in the way." The words hit Ethan harder than any blow could have. He felt his world unraveling. "Lara," Ethan whispered, his mind flashing back to her warning. "She was right," he muttered to himself, but David's laugh interrupted him. "Too late, Ethan. You've already sealed your fate." Ethan's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Lara had warned him, but he hadn't listened. He had trusted David, even when the signs had pointed to him being the one pulling the strings. "What did you do to Claire, David?" Ethan's voice broke as he asked the question he had been dreading. David's eyes flickered briefly, a momentary flash of something like regret, but it was quickly replaced by indifference. "She was nothing more than a pawn," he said coldly. "A means to an end." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Claire had been sacrificed, just like all the others. He felt his stomach churn, the weight of the betrayal crushing him. "You're insane," Ethan muttered, stepping back. David laughed, the sound hollow and cruel. "I'm not insane, Ethan. I'm just surviving. You should have done the same." Ethan clenched his fists. "You'll pay for this," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the realization sank in. David had been playing him all along. The truth he had sought was now a nightmare, and the path ahead seemed only darker. But there was no turning back now. David had crossed a line, and Ethan knew he couldn't let him get away with it. As he turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening crash. The lights flickered once more, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward him. David's voice echoed through the darkness. "You'll never leave this place, Ethan. Not alive." Panic surged in Ethan's chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't about to be a victim. He wasn't about to let David win. But as the shadows shifted around him, he felt the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on him. This was no longer just about Claire, it was about survival. Ethan Blackwell stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. The truth about Claire's fate, the painful, horrific truth, had just been revealed. She hadn't disappeared by accident, she had been taken. A victim of the shadow people, used as a pawn in their dark game. His mind raced with disbelief, his heart ached with the loss. His hands trembled as he reached for the crumpled photograph that David had handed him earlier. Claire's face stared back at him, but now there was a grim understanding in her eyes. Ethan's world had crumbled, and with it, any sense of safety he had left. "This is your doing, David," Ethan spat, his voice trembling with rage. David's cold laugh echoed in the otherwise silent room. "You should have known better, Ethan. You were always too curious for your own good." Ethan's fists clenched, the pain of betrayal searing through him. He had been so close, but now the truth felt more distant than ever. The shadows shifted once more, and Ethan could feel their presence growing stronger, as if they were drawing closer to claim him as well. As Ethan stared at the photograph of Claire, a dark realization settled in his mind. The shadow people weren't just a myth or a whispered legend, they were real, and they had been manipulating events for far longer than he had ever imagined. His mind flashed back to all the clues he had ignored, the warnings he had brushed aside. Lara had been right. He had pushed forward without fully understanding the danger, consumed by his desire for the truth. But now, there was no turning back. The shadow people were real, and they would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. He turned to leave the warehouse, but the room seemed to stretch endlessly before him, the shadows growing deeper, more menacing. "I have to finish this," Ethan whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the deafening silence. His feet carried him forward, despite the overwhelming sense of dread that clung to him like a heavy cloak. This was no longer just about Claire, it was about survival, and the truth that would either save or destroy him. The door creaked open, and Ethan stepped into the cold night air. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, rage, fear, and a deep, unshakable sense of loss. He had uncovered the truth, but it had come at a devastating cost. As he walked through the alley, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting to see Lara, but instead it was a figure cloaked in darkness, its face hidden in shadow. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "You've come too far, Ethan," the voice said, low and chilling. The words struck like a physical blow, sending a shiver down his spine. The figure took a step forward, its presence almost suffocating. "You should have stayed away from the truth. Now, it's too late." Ethan's breath hitched as the figure's shadow seemed to grow larger, engulfing him. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking but resolute. The figure remained silent, only the shadows shifting around it in response. Ethan's hand instinctively reached for the knife at his belt. The confrontation was inevitable, and the figure's next move would determine whether Ethan would survive. Ethan's hand tightened around the knife's hilt as the figure moved closer. The shadows around them seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and Ethan could feel his pulse quicken. The figure stepped forward again, and Ethan instinctively raised the knife. But before he could strike, the figure's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with inhuman strength. "You can't fight what you don't understand," the figure rasped, its voice filled with cold certainty. Ethan struggled to free himself, but the grip was like iron. "Let me go," Ethan growled, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, the shadows around them grew thicker, swirling and shifting as if alive. "You were never meant to know the truth, Ethan," the figure continued, its grip tightening. "And now you'll pay the price for seeking it." Panic surged in Ethan's chest, but he knew he couldn't let this be the end. With every ounce of strength he had left, Ethan twisted his wrist, breaking free from the figure's grasp. He backed away, panting, knowing that the truth was more dangerous than he had ever realized. Ethan Blackwell staggered backward, his chest heaving as the figure slowly stepped into the light. His mind raced, but the pain in his wrist was a constant reminder of how close he had come to losing. The figure stood before him, unmoving. The truth was now undeniable. He was up against something far greater than he had ever imagined. "You think you can stop us?" the figure whispered, its voice colder than the night air. "The shadow people will always remain in the shadows. You are nothing but a fleeting moment in our eternity." Ethan's eyes hardened. "I won't let you hide any longer," the figure smirked, stepping back into the darkness. "You don't understand, Ethan. You never will." And with that it vanished into the shadows, leaving Ethan alone in the dark, standing at the precipice of a deeper, darker truth. Ethan Blackwell stood at the edge of the rooftop, looking down at the city below. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was certain: he had come too far to back down now. The truth had already cost him Claire, and now it threatened to take everything else from him. He had faced the shadow people, but it wasn't over. It couldn't be. As the wind howled around him, he saw the figure again, standing on the opposite side of the rooftop. It was David, the one who had betrayed him, and the one who now sought to end him. "You still don't understand, do you, Ethan?" David's voice was cold, his eyes gleaming with a dark satisfaction. "The truth was never meant for you." Ethan's fists clenched, his knuckles white as he prepared for the final confrontation. "You'll never control the truth," Ethan spat, taking a step forward. "Not as long as I'm alive." Ethan Blackwell's heart raced as he faced David across the darkened rooftop. The cold wind whipped through the night air, but Ethan didn't flinch. "You're too late, Ethan," David sneered, his face illuminated by the flickering streetlights below. "This was always going to end this way." Ethan's hands clenched at his sides, his mind filled with rage and disbelief. "I'm done with your lies," Ethan spat, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "All this time you've been hiding the truth, manipulating everyone. But not anymore." David laughed, his eyes gleaming. "You think you've won? The shadow people are already in control. You're just a pawn, Ethan. Always have been." Ethan's body tensed, his resolve solidifying. "Maybe I've been a pawn, but I'm done being played." With that, he rushed forward, determined to end this. Ethan's breath came in short gasps as he faced David, every muscle in his body ready for the final strike. David was taunting him, trying to break his resolve with every word. "You're too weak, Ethan. You'll never be able to stop them." The words stung, but Ethan wasn't about to back down now. His hand tightened around the knife at his belt. "I've lost too much to let you win," Ethan replied, his voice unwavering. He rushed forward again, but David moved faster, ducking under his strike and knocking him to the ground. Ethan groaned in pain, but he was relentless. "This ends tonight, David." David's smirk faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing as he realized Ethan wasn't giving up. The fight wasn't over yet. Ethan rose to his feet, his body aching, but his determination stronger than ever. David's mocking voice echoed in his mind. "You'll never escape the truth, Ethan. It will consume you." But Ethan wasn't afraid anymore. He knew what he had to do. The fight wasn't about stopping David. It was about taking back control, reclaiming what was lost. "You're wrong, David," Ethan said, his voice low but filled with fire. "I will stop you, and I will stop the shadow people." With those words, Ethan lunged forward again, his knife slicing through the air. This time David couldn't dodge. The fight had reached its breaking point, and Ethan was ready to end it once and for all. David's body crumpled to the ground, his lifeless eyes staring up at the night sky. Ethan stood over him, his chest heaving with exhaustion, the weight of the battle finally sinking in. He had won, but at what cost? The rooftop felt eerily quiet now, the only sound being Ethan's labored breathing. He had stopped David, but the shadow people were still out there, still lurking in the darkness. Ethan had no illusions about what was to come. The fight for truth was far from over. He took a deep breath, wiped the blood from his hands, and looked out over the city. The shadows still watched, but now Ethan had a new sense of resolve. He would face them no matter what it took. Ethan Blackwell stood on the edge of the rooftop, watching the city lights flicker beneath him. The battle was over, but the consequences weighed heavily on his soul. Claire's loss, the betrayals, the truth, it was all too much. What now? He whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the wind. He had uncovered everything, but at what cost? The shadows were still lurking, and even though he had exposed the truth, it felt like something more ominous was waiting just around the corner. Ethan turned his back to the city and made his way down to the empty alleyways below. His mind replayed the events, David's betrayal, the shadowy figures, the chilling whispers. It was all too much. He had exposed the truth, but he had lost so much along the way. Laura's words echoed in his mind. You can't trust everyone. He had failed to heed her warning, but now, with nothing left to lose, he realized how true they had been. The fight wasn't over. The true enemy was still out there. Ethan stood in front of the old cracked mirror, looking at his reflection. It was a face he barely recognized. The battle for truth had changed him. His hands, once steady, now trembled. He could still hear the echo of the whispers, feel the shadows lurking just beyond his reach. The fight against the shadow people was far from over, but for the first time Ethan wondered if he was the one being hunted. The truth had cost him more than he could ever imagine, and now he had to live with the consequences. Ethan walked through the streets, his mind clouded with doubts. Laura's words lingered in his thoughts, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. The figure that had haunted him, the shadow people, he knew they were far from gone. His pursuit of the truth had opened doors he couldn't close. As the world around him moved on, Ethan felt himself slipping into a dark corner, one that was all his own. And yet, something inside him refused to let go. He would find the rest of the truth, no matter the cost. Ethan stood in the empty street, staring at the shadows that stretched before him. The world seemed to pause, as if waiting for him to make a choice. He could continue his pursuit of the truth, or he could walk away, leave it all behind. But something told him that the shadows would never truly leave him, no matter where he went. With a heavy sigh, Ethan made his decision. The battle had changed him, and now it was time to confront the truth, even if it meant facing the darkness once more. Ethan stood at the entrance of a small, forgotten church, its wooden doors creaking as they opened. He had returned to where it all began. The search for the truth, the loss of Claire, the betrayals, everything had led him back here. He glanced at the stained glass windows, now cracked and faded, their colors dull with age. He had found answers, but they had come at a cost. Laura had warned him about the price of seeking the truth. Now, Ethan realized that the truth was just the beginning. There was still more to uncover. Inside the church, the air was heavy, thick with dust and the smell of age. Ethan felt the weight of every step as he moved through the pews, now empty and forgotten. His fingers brushed the wood, the silence overwhelming him. This place had once been a sanctuary, but now it felt like a tomb. He had uncovered the truth, but it was nothing like he had imagined. The shadow people were still out there, and the knowledge he had gained only made him more vulnerable. As Ethan knelt before the altar, he felt the shadows creep closer, as if they were waiting for him to make the next move. As Ethan stood up, he turned to leave the church, but something caught his eye. In the corner of the room, hidden behind a broken pillar, was a small box. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside the box was a letter, old, yellowed, and sealed. It was addressed to him. He opened it with trembling hands, and as he read the contents, his blood ran cold. It was a message from someone he thought was long gone, a message that changed everything he thought he knew about the shadow people and the conspiracy that had been lurking in the shadows all along. The message was clear. There was more to the shadow people than Ethan had ever realized. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone had imagined, and the truth was far more dangerous. He looked at the letter one last time, his mind racing with questions. Lara had always warned him about the dangers of uncovering too much, but now it was too late to turn back. He had seen too much, and the price had already been paid. As he left the church, he felt the weight of the legacy he had uncovered pressing down on him. He couldn't escape the shadows, but he had to continue. There was no other choice. Ethan walked down the street, the weight of the letter still in his hand. He had uncovered the truth, but the cost was high. The shadows would never truly leave him. As he looked up at the horizon, he knew one thing for certain: his journey wasn't over. The truth had changed him, and now he had no choice but to face whatever came next. The past was behind him, but the legacy of what he had uncovered would follow him wherever he went. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he walked into the unknown, ready for whatever the shadows had in store.